Despite the avalanche of coverage surrounding the royal wedding in April, can you remember a single story explaining why there was such a huge global audience? What prompted 2 billion people to stop and dwell on the wedding of a young English couple? Today on the Trumpet Daily, we look at why the world was so fascinated.
The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. In a world in which the dark side of humanity is on perpetual display, at a time of unparalleled uncertainty and instability, the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton earlier this year was a rare and much welcome moment of unity and tranquility, of hope and joy. For a fleeting moment, 2 billion people, nearly 1/3 of mankind, set aside pride and prejudice and witnessed human civilization at its best. But why such intense interest in this particular royal wedding? Royal weddings elsewhere don't attract any significant international attention. Why, out of nearly 200 nations in the world, does a royal wedding in the little island nation of Britain appear to be so unique and so special? To understand, one has to look at the true source of the ancient ceremony and pageantry surrounding this royal wedding. For the main message today, we will be showing part one of a forum my father gave to students here at Herbert W. Armstrong College on May the 11th. Enjoy.
About 2 billion people watched the wedding of William and Kate's. 2 billion people watching a wedding. That's almost 1/3 of humanity, and that's breaking all kinds of records. Nothing's ever happened like that before, where people were so fascinated by a wedding. They said that the forecast was for cloudy weather and rain on that day, but then after the bride stepped out of her car and into Westminster Abbey, the sun started to shine, and it was a beautiful day and a magnificent wedding. And even some of the media people there said it was even like a miracle. And perhaps it was even a miracle. Charles Moore wrote in the Telegraph, he said, quote, "There are other royal weddings in Spain or Sweden or Swaziland, and I am sure they are very nice. But they do not stand for anything much in the eyes of the world. They don't attract messages of support from the crew in the International Space Station, a particularly surreal touch in yesterday's reports. They don't echo in the imagination of humanity. Our one does." That was on April the 29th. Now, I think that was a good insight that he has there. And yet, does he know why they have that vast audience? Why such a vast audience to watch a marriage? And of course, William's mom and dad also had a huge audience, the biggest ever at that time. And I don't recall seeing where one journalist understood why that huge audience. Why did they have such a huge audience? Now, I'm going to give you the main reason today why there was such a vast audience. I'm going to talk about the royal wedding, and I want to show you that it gives us an insight into the world's only hope. The world's only hope. The royal wedding revolved around a throne that was prophesied to be here in this end time. And also there was a message that was prophesied to be here in this end time, explaining that throne and what it all means. That was all prophesied, and if we understand that better, we're going to understand why the audience was so enormous. And you can bring hope into your life through understanding that, and a hope that's a billion times greater than just a wedding, just a physical wedding. In 1 Chronicles 29 and verse 23, it says this: as you know, Saul was the first human king of Israel, and David succeeded him. And David sat on the Eternal's throne, it says. But here in 1 Chronicles 29, it says, then Solomon sat on the throne of the Eternal as king instead of David his father. So here are these human kings that have all been sitting on the Eternal's throne, on God's throne. Is it really possible that the Queen of England could be sitting on God's throne? And that Prince William is an heir to sit on God's throne? Does that really resonate in very many people's minds today? For several generations after Israel left Egypt, God was the king of Israel. God was the king of Israel. You can read that in the books of Moses and Joshua and Judges. But he was Israel's only king. Now there are 12 nations of Israel today, and prophecy focuses mainly on 3 of those. But Israel was the only nation to ever have God as their king. The only nation that ever had God as their king. And of course, that's explained in our book on the United States and Britain in prophecy. But notice what it says in 2 Samuel 7, verses 4 through 5 and 12 through 16. I'll just quickly read this to you. And it came to pass that night that the word of the Eternal came unto Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, thus says the Eternal, you shall build me an house for me to dwell in. ? When the days be fulfilled, and you shall sleep with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, which shall proceed out of your bowels, Solomon, she's talking about, and I will establish his kingdom, and he shall build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. The throne of his kingdom forever. Goes on to say, I will be his father, and he shall be my son. And if he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before you, and your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. Forever, God says. From that time on, as Mr. Armstrong explains, let me just read to you a little of what Mr. Armstrong wrote in his book on the United States and Britain in prophecy. He said, number 1, David's throne was set up and established with Solomon, David's son. Number 2, the throne, David's throne, verse 16, was established forever in Solomon. Observe that this nowhere says that when Christ comes, God will establish it in him forever. It says it was to be established forever in Solomon. In Solomon. That's quite a promise. Number 3, what if Solomon or the children of Israel disobey? Would that cancel the covenant? Verses 14 through 15 plainly say that if they commit iniquity, God will chasten them with a rod of men, but will not break this covenant. The throne shall go on forever just the same. David's throne is going to go on forever from that time on. Where is that throne? It seems like it would be incumbent upon just about anybody who read something like that to want to prove, well, where is that throne? Where is it? Where is there such a throne where God would say, I'm going to establish it and it's going to continue forever? And he means forever. That's phenomenal when you think about it. What a prophecy that is. I mean, we have to say, well, God's integrity is at stake here. His character and his power, all of that is at stake, and our faith is at stake. Did that really come to pass? Did that really happen as God absolutely, totally promised that it would? But now, Mr. Armstrong wrote, I give you a scripture that ends all speculation as to when this throne was established. Quote, Hear me, you Jeroboam, and all Israel. Ought you not to know that the eternal God of Israel gave the kingdom over to Israel, to David forever, even to him and to his sons, plural, by a covenant of salt. 2 Chronicles 13, 4 and 5. The margin says perpetual covenant. This shows the establishing of the throne was then in the past. So this is talking about all those kings that have been sitting on David's throne from that time all the way down to right now, including the royal family in Britain today. It's all a part of that promise that God made, and he said that covenant will not be broken. Will not. But he said this kingdom to David and his sons, and not his son, Christ, but his sons, plural, continuously forever. And then Psalm 89 adds to that, verses 3 and 4, I have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn unto David my servant. The seed, dynasty, Moffat says, will I establish forever and build up your throne to all generations. Wow. Build up your throne to all generations. That's quite a promise. I mean, God is really making quite a promise here. Is it possible that throne in Britain is God's throne? I mean, where else could it be? It's not too hard to figure that out, is it? Where else could you find God's throne? And all those promises that last forever. And they're going to be there right until the time that Christ comes back and rules the earth for 1,000 years and then extends that on out into all eternity. That's what this promise is all about. Now, if you just want the greatest physical sign of hope in this world, it would have to be that throne. Or let's say, you could even say the little chair that's a symbol of that throne that they sit in when the kings or queens are coronated. I mean, it's something physical that the world can touch. I've touched that chair. I know it's there, and I know it is a symbol of God's throne because it's proven so many ways in the Bible. And after all, if it isn't there, if it isn't here on this earth somewhere, then God is, well, he's not telling us the truth, or he doesn't have enough power to do what he says he's going to do. But you know, I think, better than that. God does exactly what he says he's going to do, and that throne is really a witness in many ways against Israel in this world, or to Israel in this world. It's not against them. It's all for them, but they're not giving it the awe and respect that God would expect of them.